As a recruiting captain for JP Morgan and also just over the course of my life, I probably reviewed over 1,000 resumes, and today I'm gonna give you some of my best tips and tricks so that you can land your dream job. What's up everyone, my name is Ben and welcome to Rare Liquid, a channel for tech investing and career advice. Today's agenda looks like this. I'll first provide you with some overall guidance, then show you the evolution of my resumes. I'll then go over the 7 key tips I have for you, and lastly go over some giveaways and shoutouts. As a friendly reminder, I'll be posting career related videos on the weekends and stock and crypto related videos on the weekdays. And if you'd like some more personal career advice from me, feel free to check out my Rare Liquid Careers Patreon in the description below. Okay, so first up, let me give you some overall guidance from a recruiter's perspective. As you may have seen from my previous video, I was the JP Morgan recruiting captain for summer analyst recruiting for 2 years, and a lot of what I'm about to really share today stems from that experience. My recruiting team and I usually would review about 150 to 200 resumes in usually 1 to 2 hours. And so if you think about that, it's usually around 30 to 60 seconds max. Usually if the resume just had some glaring errors or had a really low GPA, I would probably not even spend more than 5 seconds. And if it was a pretty solid resume, then I might spend something like 30 seconds, maybe a little bit more if I needed to. But basically the point is that your resume is your first impression to get an interview, or maybe if you're doing a coffee chat, it's the first thing someone knows about you. And so the most important thing about a resume you have to understand is that you have to make a really strong first impression with it. This really boils down to 2 things, which is first that your resume needs to be pretty aesthetically pleasing and really well formatted. And second of all of your individual lines have to be really well crafted. And I'll basically walk you through how to do that throughout this video. With that said, let me share with you the evolution of my resumes. I'm going to be sharing with you my resumes just because I think it's the best way for you to really learn by using an example. And I'm going to be sharing 3. One that I use for consulting recruiting, one for banking recruiting, and one for when I left banking. And so it's kind of one of my more recent resumes. Starting with consulting, this resume got me interviews with Deloitte, Bain, and BCG during my junior year. What I really want to focus on here is my professional and leadership sections. For the professional section, you can see that I have 4 consulting experiences in a row. And so if a recruiter saw this resume, they wouldn't have to spend much time to see that I'm really interested in consulting. In the leadership and activity section, my 2nd and 3rd experiences are also consulting related. And I also included my volunteer experience at Tanzania because it was a really big part of my story when I was recruiting. Let's now compare this to my senior year resume that I used for banking. As you can see, I completely changed my professional and leadership sections to focus on finance experiences, and also changed a lot of the individual lines as well to focus on finance work streams. I also changed my titles a bit from consultant to analyst for social sector solutions and Cisco, and this was just because I was applying for an investment banking analyst position, and you can have a little bit of flexibility with your titles. In the professional section, I took out one of my consulting projects with Andreessen Horowitz because that project didn't involve any finance work, and I also added an older internship from Merrill Lynch. In the leadership and activity section, I added a Goldman Sachs case competition I participated in just to show a little bit more of my interest in finance, and I also took out my volunteer work. Now, I'm not going to go too much in detail into everything that changed here, so here are the resumes again side by side, and you can pause the video and compare them if you'd like. Basically, with these resumes, what I really just wanted to show you is that for the industry that you're applying for, you should really cater your resume to it as much as you can. Next up, let me show you one of my more recent resumes, which looks way different. First of all, I changed up my formatting because I needed a lot more space to write about my experiences. I also have my education section at the bottom because once you are in the workforce, your professional experience is the main priority. But if you're an undergraduate student, you'll want education to be at the top. But anyway, I'm going to be using this resume to go through my 7 resume tips for you, so let's move on to that. First up, let me tell you about the only 4 sections you need. In my opinion, for the vast majority of industries, I think the only 4 sections you really need are education, professional, leadership and activities, and skills and interests. This means you do not need an objective statement, and most recruiters find it to be pretty outdated to add this. Also, of course, if you're in a specialized industry, I don't know, like medicine or engineering or something, and your resumes look really different, then I think that's totally fair, and there may be some sections that I just don't know about that's important for those industries. It's just that this is mainly for business, and I do think that the tips that I have for you will still probably be relevant no matter what industry you're in. Before I go into each of these sections, also remember to put your name at the very top, and I put it on the left-hand side and contact information and LinkedIn link on the right-hand side to save some space. Most resumes have their names in the middle and contact information below, but as you get older, you actually start to run out of room, so this is why I do it like that. Moving on to the sections for education, you should have your standard things like your university, GPA, major GPA if it's higher, standardized test scores if you have decent scores, awards, and you can also add relevant coursework if you need to fill up your resume. The professional and leadership and activity sections should include the company or organization name, your title, location, and dates. One thing I also like to do is add the industry for each company or organization because some people may not know the companies you've worked at, but this of course is optional. And for my skills and interest section, I do go a bit overboard, but I'll explain this a little bit later. And for most resumes, just the skills and interests should suffice if that's all you really want to add. Second, let me share some tips on overall formatting. Personally, I really liked my college format because I thought it was pretty unique, but later on, as I just had more and more experiences, I realized that I needed to switch over to kind of more standard template like my post-banking resume just because it allowed more space for me to write. Of course, you can choose whatever formatting you like and prefer, but just remember that the most important thing is that you just need to make sure your resume makes a killer first impression and is aesthetically pleasing. The first tip I have for formatting is to make sure that each line reaches the right-hand side margin of the page. If you look at my resume, there's very little white space on the right-hand side, and this is purposefully done, and I made sure that all the words that I used reached that right-hand side of the page. And I know it's going to be difficult to perfectly get it there, but trust me when I say that it's worth it. If your resume bullets are one line each and it doesn't reach the full page and it only reaches half, then I'm going to look at it and think, is this work stream even important? And if it is, then how come this person could not even fill up an entire line on a page? If your resume bullet is 2 lines, then I do think that it may be okay for the first one to be the full length and then the second one to be half or 2/3. But generally speaking, and maybe I just have too much attention to detail or something, I just like having everything reach the right-hand side. I think when you look at the overall resume, things just look a lot more symmetrical and aesthetic. The second thing that I like to do is bold the company name and location and italicize the position, title, and date. And I think this is relatively standard stuff. Third, I like to use square bullets because it just looks nicer in my opinion, but again, totally up to you. Fourth, the font I'm using right now is Gaudi Old Style, which I personally think looks the nicest, but there are others like Garamond or Times New Roman, which are pretty popular as well. And lastly, probably the most important formatting tip is consistency. All the formatting in your resume should be consistent from where you are bolding things to the amount of space in between each experience, and this is super, super important. Overall, when a recruiter looks at your resume, they should be able to tell that you put a ton of time and effort into it, and all the details like formatting really come into play for that really killer first impression. So make sure you're spending that extra time, that upfront energy to make sure your resume formatting is all perfect so that you can make that really, really good first impression and get that interview. My third tip is to add subsections if possible. What I'm referring to here are the sections highlighted in red here from my most recent resume. If you are recruiting for investment banking and have transaction experience from previous banking or private equity internships, then you should 100% have these subsections. For you future bankers out there, here is a more fleshed out section that I used to have in my resume when JP Morgan was my only professional experience. These subsections are really standard for bankers once they have left undergraduate and are full-time working in banking, and laying out the transactions like that really help call out what you worked on when you're recruiting for things like private equity or hedge funds. So if you are a candidate for banking and if I was reviewing your resume, you had a pretty solid GPA and you had the subsections where you worked on transactions for different boutique investment banking internships or private equity firms that you worked at, then most likely I would lean towards giving you an interview. But regardless of the industry you're in, I do think it's helpful to break down your professional experiences, especially if it's a really long section, into different subsections. And you probably saw that in my Aesthetic Studios section. My fourth tip is in regards to the importance of the first words and lines in your resume. The first words should always be in the past tense, even if it's a job you're currently in, just so that everything in the resume is consistent. The biggest tip I have for you in choosing the first words to use in the lines of your resume is to look at the job description that you're applying for and see what kind of words that they use. So if they use words like analyze, construct, or build, then you probably want to use those words as well, so that when a recruiter looks at your resume, they see that, okay, this person is kind of doing similar things in previous jobs, and so maybe he or she can, just apply the skills that they've already built to this current job. And also, I have heard that some computers now are analyzing the types of words that resumes use, and that can make a difference in recruiting for that first resume screen. I don't really know if this is true, but if it is, then another good reason to look at that job description and use those words. You also need to pay attention to the first few lines under each company that you worked at or whatever experience and what you put there, because as I mentioned earlier, recruiters and people don't really spend that much time on your resume. So they might read the first 1 to 2 lines under each experience, and you want to make sure that those lines are the most hard-hitting and impactful ones that you have. My 5th tip for you is to use the template for your lines of what you did plus the impact you made. And this is what I mean by that. If you look at this line from my resume, the analyzed 3,000 job descriptions is what I did, and the rest of the line that you see here is the impact that I made. I personally think that this template structure is super valuable, because as recruiters, you do really just want to know from a candidate what they did and the impact that they made, right? So if you're able to structure your lines like this, then that is super powerful. And I recommend doing it for at least 75% of your lines if you can. Now, I know that not every single line is able to be structured in this way. For example, when I was back in college, I worked as an administrative assistant at a school for about a semester, and really all I did was like photocopy papers, and I can't really say what kind of impact I made there, right? So I get it, if you're young and you don't have the ability to structure all your lines in that way, then that's totally fine. Just if you can, this is a really good structure to keep in mind and implement. You also get a lot of bonus points if you're able to quantify the what you did part, and especially the impact you made part. And this is really important because it shows that you're really thoughtful about the impact that you made to your company or organization. And that's actually part of the next part of the video, so let's move on to that. Like I said, my 6th tip is to quantify. Having a lot of numbers in your resume makes for a really strong, good first impression, because it kind of shows that you're comfortable with numbers whether you are or not, because it makes it seem like you are focused on making a measurable impact in your organizations or companies that you work at. And what kind of employer would not want to see that? Whenever I gave resume feedback, I would always ask for every single line, can you quantify this? Can you quantify this? Whether it was the number of people you're managing or the number of companies that you reached out to when you're doing some outreach, you'd be surprised at the amount of things that you can actually quantify if you really put some time to think about it. And I really highly recommend at least 75% or more of your lines having at least one number in them each. A question I get a lot is, what if you don't know exactly what the numbers are? And for that, I say it's totally fine to use an estimate as long as you're not lying and really stretching the truth, and as long as you're in the right ballpark. My last tip for you is to make your skills and interest section a conversation starter. The skills line is pretty self-explanatory, but that should include anything like software or technical skills like programming languages. For the interests line, make sure to try to choose ones that make you sound as unique as possible. And if you're going to choose something more quote unquote cookie cutter like traveling, I highly recommend adding a parentheses afterwards and making it sound more unique, like what I did with 8-Ball Pool here. Now, I go a little bit overboard here with my section with favorite books, movies, and personal feats, but I have personally found that this has led to a lot of conversations during interviews. The reason that I think adding a bit more than usual is beneficial, and the reason I did it beyond just liking books and movies, is just that it gives you more chances for the interviewer to have a similar interest as you and kind of pinpoint that out during an interview, and it could lead to a conversation and maybe lead for you guys to, develop more of a personal bond during that short interview. And so that's personally why I recommend trying to add a little bit more if you can, or at least making your skills and interest section as interesting as you can. And if you don't want to, then, of course, it's totally optional. Okay, lastly, let me chat about giveaways and announcements. First up, as I announced in my last video, I'm going to be giving away $10 to the first comment on each future video and a random comment. So these are our two winners today. Just DM me on Instagram and I'll tell you how you can collect your winnings. Second, if you'd like to win 10% of my May 2021 YouTube earnings, then look for this picture of Oprah on my Instagram, and it'll be at least $300, but probably more than that from what everything is looking like so far. And lastly, a brief shout out to Yue So for joining as a Terabyte patron in the community. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And for the rest of you, if you'd like to join the Patreon, check out a link for it in the description below. All right, so this wraps up the video. Thank you so much as always for watching. You can check out my different social media platforms if you want. I have links for it in the description below as well. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer as many as I can. Thanks so much for watching as always and for tuning in. Hope to catch you in the next one. Peace out.